Hello, this is Tyler.
Sorry. Oh, wait, sorry. That's my bad, sorry.
Okay, I think it works. Wait, so you can see the audience.
Do you see and hear me fine?
For first size. Here. Hello, can you hear us? 1, 2.
Yes, hi.
Perfect. Okay. So everyone, Tyler Cowen. Tyler is someone that appreciates a lot. He's like a modern day Renaissance man, and he's doing a lot of things. And among the rest, like he is going to speak about the nature of the debasement problem and what it entails. And Tyler, the floor is yours.
I shall start now.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I cannot be there, but several commitments have me tied to the Virginia area. I thought I would offer some remarks on the depreciation of the dollar and also crypto. So if there's 2 words you should take away from this talk, those 2 words, I think, are fiscal dominance. So fiscal dominance, in a nutshell today, means that future rates of inflation are likely to be higher than the current rate, not lower. The simplest way to see this is that the United States has about $38 trillion in outstanding debt, which of course is a lot. If we were to cut social spending, most of that money would still be there. That would not be enough to erase the debt. If we were to put on a very high rate of taxation, if we put on something like an 18% VAT, that would solve the problem. But in essence, it would mean that prices would go up by 18%. You'd have some short-run high inflation anyway. And furthermore, it would be extremely, extremely politically unpopular. People's living standards would fall by something approximating 18%. So US politicians have been very reluctant to do that. And I don't see any serious move toward having a value-added tax at a high rate. So what are we going to do? My suspicion is we will do a number of things to close our fiscal gap, but most likely we will inflate some of it away, but we will inflate it away more slowly than just putting on a one-time, say 18 or 20% VAT. So currently the rate of inflation is running about 3%. It does not seem to be falling anytime soon. I'm not sure the Federal Reserve is trying to get it fall. There have been some interest rate cuts. Trump, every now and then, it's quite low, but he's essentially making that up. We used to have 2% inflation, or even actually 1.8%, and now we have something like 3%. What I would predict for the future is we will approach something like 4% inflation. Now, why would we have 4% inflation? I think there are at least 2 reasons why politicians would prefer that. The first is each time we inflate away some of the real value or the real burden of the government debt. So if you keep on inflating at 4%, essentially that means that 17, 18 years later, you've cut the real burden of your debt in half, which is probably enough for this country to remain fiscally sound. Now, voters also would hate a rate of inflation of 4%, and I think periodically they might pressure our government or pressure the Fed to lower it. So it could take more time, but I think back and forth, the rate will periodically go up again, simply because there's no choice. It's easier for politicians to stomach. If you ask me personally, which would I rather have, periodic higher rates of inflation or permanently higher taxes, I'd actually rather have the inflation. So at least some voters, some elites are likely to support this move, however grudgingly, because they think the alternative will be worse. It seems when, say, value-added taxes are instituted, they never ever go away. I can't think of a single country that put in a VAT at a high rate and then took it away. I recall New Zealand in the 1980s, they put in a value-added tax to balance their budget. They had a fiscal crisis. There simply never has been talk of cutting that rate, even though New Zealand for quite a while was governed by people who you might call free market conservatives or supply siders. So inflation for the US, however unpleasant, might be our best alternative. Another reason why I think we will get higher rates of inflation is to do with the capital gains tax. As I suspect you all know, the American capital gains tax is not indexed to rates of inflation. So you pay taxes on nominal gains rather than real gains. Typically, that is inefficient, but if you need to close a $38 trillion fiscal gap, it's another way you can tax people more without it being so obvious that you're taxing them more. Furthermore, the people paying taxes on capital gains, they tend to be relatively wealthy, relatively able to pay those taxes. And you're taxing the winners, not the losers, which if people even look behind the veil of inflation, will seem to be relatively fair, whether or not you or I might agree with that. But I think that would be the public perception. So through these two channels, inflation will improve our fiscal position. Does not mean inflation is good. Economists pretty unanimously will agree that higher rates of inflation are bad. We're simply stuck in a position we never should have gotten ourselves into. And again, the rational expectation is to have higher inflation. So far, I've only talked about the United States. Analogous logic will apply to some other countries, not all of them. So Germany, for instance, is not far from a balanced budget. But if you look at Japan, the debt to GDP ratio in Japan is about 230%. That is more than twice our debt to GDP ratio. Furthermore, Japan is a poorer country, and the yen is a well-known currency, but it's not the international reserve currency in the way that the dollar is. So I think you could predict Japan in the future is also more likely to have higher rates of inflation. For Japan, it's trickier because, as I said, the yen is not an international reserve currency. So the more Japan inflates, it could be that people will want to run away or not buy Japanese government securities. With US Treasury bills, the demand is probably more stable because they are the linchpin or the underpinning of the entire global economy. So it's harder for Japan to get away with inflation than it is for America. If you take a very small country, say Iceland. I think Iceland has a population of about 400,000 people. The kroner is their currency. Icelanders are used to holding a lot of money abroad in non-kroner denominated assets. The ability of the Icelandic government to inflate more is really pretty limited. But the United States, a lot of our citizens don't even have passports. We're the global reserve currency. We can twist people's arms to buy T-bills. Trump already is doing some things in this direction. And again, these are all reasons to think we will have higher inflation. So from a crypto point of view, what does this mean? I think it means there's simply an opening for other assets which will not be penalized by this inflation. I'd just like to be clear, I don't consider myself a doomer or a panic monger. I know some people in the crypto world. I will not name names, but you probably know some of the same people. They think the dollar is going to collapse, or America will have hyperinflation, or the country will have a massive financial crisis. I don't believe any of those things. In fact, I think that the chance of any of them is extremely small. But that said, I do think we will depreciate and devalue our currency more, and this will be good for some kinds of financial innovation. Part of our project of devaluing the currency may be what economists call financial repression. That is, you want to stop people from leaving the dollar-based system. So we could, for instance, force banks, private credit, private equity, whatever. We could just regulate institutions or individuals and make them hold a lot of T-bills. And that will make it easier to inflate without people running out of the currency. I think there's a good chance we will do that. But the problem with financial repression is that it tends to stimulate financial innovation from outside the system. So if you think, well, why did money market funds arise? Checkable money market deposits also. For a long time, in the United States, by law, you could earn interest on your checking account. And there was higher inflation than there is today. So people looked for different end runs around the system to earn higher rates of return. So if you're in crypto, I think we will see a real blossoming of financial innovation, a lot of opportunities to come up with new assets or re-engineer currently existing assets, just to give people new and better options. The U.S. economy remains quite productive, so there are actually positive rates of return to distribute. People will want to hold other assets as treasury bills become less attractive, as just currency becomes less attractive, as a simple checking account or money market fund becomes less attractive. I don't think I have specific predictions of which assets will be. I do think Bitcoin demand will be robust, but I think there'll just be room for people to come up with ways of helping American and other citizens earn positive rates of return on their money and escape this spending increase in how much the inflation trap is going to bite. Now, there's another side of crypto, quite distinct from Bitcoin, and that is stablecoin. I'm quite bullish on stablecoins, but I do see some complications. So let me talk about those just a little. Stablecoin, of course, is supposed to be stable with respect to the dollar. That is a period when inflation is low and when inflation is high. So that gives me a bit of a worry about stablecoins. But that said, since I think a lot of the rest of the world, a lot of the other currencies also will see higher inflation, stable coins might be less fun, but in relative terms, they may not be less attractive than putting your money into either other currencies or coins that are pegged to other currencies. So I don't see, like a euro coin being extremely attractive anytime soon. As I think you all know, overwhelming preponderance of stable coins today are denominated in terms of US dollars. That, in essence, is the world saying, well, if we had to create a financial system all over again, we'd want to dollarize the whole thing. What I think will happen, stable coins may be a way of escaping financial repression. So the stable coin, being not regulated directly, the way legal banks, U.S. demand deposits, and U.S. currency is regulated, their less regulated status will be a much more attractive alternative in this world with somewhat higher inflation and greater financial repression. But now this is a complicated equilibrium. I'm sure you're thinking, well, if I'm the United States government, I'm not just going to let these stable coins operate freely. If I do, they will break down my financial repression. I need my financial repression to lower the budget deficit and the debt. So I think really for quite a while, and we see this already, we're going to see a significant legal tug of war over what kind of rate of return you're allowed to earn on your stable coins. So I think you're all familiar with the basic provisions of the Genius Act. But part of the Genius Act was the stipulation that the concrete regulations for implementing it would be written later and not at the time the act was passed. That's quite normal for legislation, but I worry that may turn out to be an important flaw. Because what has happened is, again, you probably all know, is that U.S. commercial banks are fearing the competition from stable coins that can pay a rate of return, and they fear deposit flight. So there is a major move afoot to write regulations that would make stable coins less attractive than I think what Congress intended when they passed the Genius Act. So the banks are fighting back. You could say, the empire strikes back, and they want ex post to rejigger the bill. So in essence, stable coins can only pay zero. But the plot thickens even further. If you were to peg the rate of return on legal stable coins to zero, what people will do is try to set up accounts where the money goes through the stable coin, but then is rather rapidly passed to something else that does pay you a positive rate of return. So whether you can truly trap the funds in zero interest paying stable coins, I think I'm fairly skeptical about that. So one way or another, I suspect the financial repression will to a considerable extent not break down, but be weakened. And again, that will be a major business opportunity for stable coins. Hello?
I called by mistake.
Sorry?
I called by mistake.
Continue.
Oh, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
You're good. Keep going. Good.
You can keep going. Can you
Oh,
hear?
okay, good. Sorry for any mix-up. So again, I think there'll be this regulatory back and forth. It will be messy. It will be ugly. It will go on for years. And there will simply be a lot of innovation opportunities for people who structure stable coins in a way that are within the bounds of the law, but pay some rate of return higher than what you can get on demand deposits. So that makes me more bullish on dollar-based stable coins, even though the somewhat higher rate of price inflation makes me worry a bit about dollar-based stable coins. To add to this picture, I think artificial intelligence is progressing quite rapidly, and this will raise the question pretty soon of what money or monies will the artificial intelligence agents use. I hear different predictions. Several years ago, I thought it would be Bitcoin. I think now I expect it will be stable coins. So when AIs trade with AIs, they probably will use stable coins. They'll hire each other to do work, right? They'll have their own companies. They'll have their own institutions. They'll want to cooperate in different ways, just as human workers do. Now, you might think, why don't they just use bank accounts? I'm pretty sure politically, this will take a long time to happen, if it ever happens. If you tell US taxpayers that an AI will hold a bank account and that the taxpayer will be on the line for FDIC insurance for an AI, not a human being, I believe that, correctly or not, will be a very unpopular political position. So the AIs will not get deposit insurance. They will not be able to access the banking system other than by persuading humans to do their bidding. And a lot of AI to AI trade will just be stable coins. Now, if AI to AI trade is stable coins, that makes the stable coin network more established. And if you're a human and you want to deal with AIs, you won't be paying them standard dollars by wiring them money through Fedwire or whatever. You will pay them with stable coins. And that too will create opportunity for the stablecoin network to grow even further. And I think part of the new business opportunity will be, can you figure out what are the stablecoins well suited to the needs of the AIs that may be quite distinct from what's well suited to the needs of humans? For one thing, AIs can just calculate more readily, at lower cost, more quickly. And you'll even face competition from AIs. So the stable coins for the AIs might come from the AIs rather than from humans. But since stable coins need some kind of connection to the dollar-based system, I don't think humans can be cut out of that loop. So you may be competing against AIs and their ideas, but the AIs with their stable coins will still need cooperation from some intermediaries. That may be you. And that's another way in which I think pretty soon, within 5 to 10 years, we'll see a lot of opportunities for innovation based on stable coins for AIs. So there'll be stable coins for AIs, stable coins to get around financial repression. And then finally, this is the use people talk about the most, just stable coins for the rest of the world, because the rest of the world, a lot of it wants to be in a US dollar-based system, but not face all those US regulations. So one thing I think we've seen happening under the Trump administration is the United States is much more closely involved in the affairs of Latin America than before. Some of you may like this, some of you may not like it, some of you may or may not like the particular ways we're doing this, but that's not my concern. I just think America will be more interventionist with its neighbors. There are already 3 economies in the New World that just use the dollar as their currency: El Salvador, Panama, Ecuador. I think there will be more, but they might just decide to do it through stable coins. So if you're a smallish Caribbean nation, and there are many, and you're wondering, well, what should your currency be? You look at Barbados. I think the population there, it's only a few 100,000 people. They have their own currency, stabilize its values. They put on capital controls. It's bad for their citizens. It's highly efficient. I'm pretty sure Barbados and many of those other countries would just be better off using some mix of the US dollar and US dollar-linked stable coins. And I think this will happen. I think in Venezuela, it's really, I would say likely, not just possible, that in the next 5 years, Venezuela will adopt as at least one of its currencies, possibly its main currency, a US dollar-connected stablecoin. That too is an opportunity for innovation, coming up with stable coins that meet the needs of Latin America and the Caribbean will be at this further area where stable coins, or maybe also other forms of crypto, will do very well. When you look at Latin America country by country, I think the reluctant ones will be Mexico, which is always a bit jealous of the United States in a way similar to how Canada is. And then Brazil, which fancies itself as a rival to the United States, and I think politically would be quite reluctant to dollarize. And of course, Brazil has plenty of scale of its own. So if you take Mexico and Brazil out of the equation, you're still left with plenty of other countries that in a significant way and sanctioned by their government, I think stand quite a good chance of using more crypto. I think the government in Cuba, there's a good chance that falls within a year or two. They're past the state of being broke. I mean, they're not even broke. They wish you could say they were broke. And they too may end up with something dollar-based and also stablecoin-based. So again, just a lot more opportunities. And I think we're still underestimating the scope of these opportunities. The world will just be changing a lot more quickly than what we have been used to. Crypto people have a great intuition for this because of crypto itself. But in terms of the geopolitics, the regulatory landscape, AI, other pending changes, I just think there's this significant swelling wave of how the world will be different that will be very good for a lot of crypto assets. And starting this off will be higher rates of inflation in this country, but many other trends will contribute. So that's the basic thrust of my remarks. I'm happy to talk about any of these issues more or field questions. If you have questions, I need a way to hear it more clearly than you speaking from your seat, but I believe we can manage that. Anyway, thank you all for having me in. And if there's time for questions, please proceed.
Thank you, Tyler. And I guess we can take one or two questions. Who wants to ask? Come here. I hope Tyler. Okay, try to speak close to the computer.
Hi, Tyler. Thank you.
Hello.
Do you hear me or?
Yeah, I hear you great now. Yes, thanks.
I was wondering about inflation. Thank you for the talk. I was wondering about inflation. How do internal dynamics play in? So like the US passes some sort of capital gains tax or wealth tax, or Japan, I don't know, mobilizes its citizens and becomes like very anti-inflation somehow. How would that affect like inflation dynamics and policy?
Well, we have a wealth tax now, and it's the fact that capital gains are not indexed to inflation. So we will increase our wealth tax by inflating at a higher rate. It would not surprise me if we had other wealth taxes, but the fiscal gap is so large that just having a wealth tax won't close it. And a wealth tax tends to diminish in effectiveness over time as people find ways of hiding their wealth. So a wealth tax will not eliminate or even much limit the pressures for higher rates of inflation. The fiscal situation is sufficiently bad. We'll need to do a whole host of things to do it. So it's not, oh, we'll do 2 or 3, thus we won't need inflation. It's more like we'll do 2 or 3, and then we'll still need some inflation on top of that. It's the fact that we can and will do a few other things. I think that's why inflation might be 4 to 5% rather than, say, 7 or 8%, which would truly be politically unpopular. It sounds grim. It is grim. And I think we're headed for an equilibrium where we already have seen this to some extent. Incumbent parties are simply unpopular no matter what. And much of Europe has the same. So expect American politics to be that way, because inflation won't be low, and there'll be all these other problems, and some taxes will go up. Incumbent parties will be unpopular no matter what. But unlike the UK, where they can fall frequently, in the US we have these very fixed terms, so there'll just be a lot of political anger and people being upset, and each party promising they'll undo the bad things about the other party, getting into office, and then utterly failing. I think that's what we can expect in the future. I know it's not cheery. It won't be cheery. Does that at least address your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
One more question? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler. Thanks for your sharing. I agree with most of those. I just want to ask one question and drill deeper on the AI for stablecoin concept. From an economic perspective, do you think like when AI trade with AI, for the stablecoin they are using, they actually would prefer something both of them take as their biggest cost component, which is computational cost, rather than dollars? So probably they will do a stablecoin packing with kind of a proxy of computational cost instead of dollars. That would be my question. Thank you.
That's an interesting possibility. I mean, I guess my first answer should be ask the AIs, right? But if the AIs are both trading with us and trading with each other, my guess is enough of their trade will be with us that they'll want to use what we're using, which will be stable coins, and not use something based in, say, the cost of energy or units of energy. But that's speculation one way or the other. And I could also imagine the AIs use both, because for the AIs, calculation costs are not an issue. A lot of humans don't like to use 3 or 4 currencies because they find it difficult to keep track in their minds of what is worth how much. I'm not saying advanced financial traders do, but most ordinary people do. The AIs won't have that limitation. So maybe there'll be this rather extreme multiplicity of currencies, many of which humans never see or even much have to learn about. That's another possibility. And then it could include energy. And it may depend on what time horizon we're talking about. I feel in the medium term, the energy will be pretty cheap, whether it's nuclear fusion or solar power from space. But of course, those are not ready now or next year or even 2 years from now. So in the short run, energy costs are really going to matter no matter what, right?
Amazing. Tyler, thank you very much.
Great. It's been a pleasure. And look forward to seeing you all next time, whenever that is.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
So pardon me if I tend to speed through certain sections. I'm going to try my best to keep on a reasonable time. All right. So I think we're probably all familiar with these sort of Ray Dalio type dynamics where we have nations that grow in importance until their currencies become the reserve currency. They then relentlessly debase these currencies, and it becomes this sort of vicious cycle where eventually this causes them to fall. And then there is a civilizational contest, and another country rises to power. In that local region, other countries come to power. But I guess the thing that I've always been wondering about that is, what does this mean in our current era? Because specifically, what does it mean in a world in which all nations are simultaneously indebted and debasing their currencies? Today, for the first time ever, global debt is roughly 3 times the world's GDP. Dozens of countries are in distress. The US has tens of trillions in unfunded liabilities once you include entitlements alongside the formal debt, the 38 trillion we're talking about. You get up to about 70 trillion, actually. And since 2020, there have been around 18 sovereign defaults across 10 countries, more than 1/3 of all defaults in the last quarter century. Roughly 1/5 of humanity now lives in a country at the edge of a debt crisis. So I guess the question is, does this great indebtedness imply that we are all on a level playing field? That the status quo will simply muddle forward? Or does it mean that the period of storm and strife typically associated with regime changes will be that much longer, more dramatic and painful before the winner eventually emerges? I would argue something different, larger, and more uncomfortable. That we've actually arrived at the end of fiat currencies as they're constituted today. The fiat currencies are an abstraction on top of human labor, an imprecise one at that, whose vulnerabilities to economic capture we've extensively discussed, and that human labor itself is being replaced by AI labor. That the predominant labor in our future world will be conducted by artificial intelligences. And so it makes sense in that world to denominate in the currency that most of the economic functioning entities are using, which we believe is units of machine intelligence. So this paradigm, that we want to capture to replace the old system needs to be something that is hardened against the severe flaws in the current paradigm. And the way that we harden it, we think at Ambient, and you can find us at ambient_XYZ, I'm Iridium Eagle on Telegram. What we believe at Ambient is that the way that we harden the new monetary order that comes into being is by adopting it as a proof of useful work. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about that, what that means, and then I'm going to go into a kind of a fast technical discussion of what Ambient does. It's a little taster. And then I'm going to wrap this up and talk about how this plays geopolitically, very briefly. So, to begin with, it's useful to look at the properties of proof of work in contrast to other approaches. So proof of work was, of course, the original paradigm for crypto. In classic proof of work, miners race to solve the same problem. For Bitcoin, that involves finding hash with specific characteristics. And since hashing is a one-way mathematical function, meaning that it's easy to map an input to a result, but very difficult to guess an input from a result, minting a Bitcoin involves a vast number of guesses around inputs. The energetic expenditure required to make a large number of guesses to be successful implies that any Bitcoin miner who mints a coin is strongly incentivized to preserve the integrity of the network's ledger, else he will devalue his own investment. So I think we all know that, but it's worth emphasizing a couple of important properties of proof of work that I think are often overlooked. So the primary asset at risk in proof of work systems is off-chain and not protocol blocked. That's something very crucial. A miner's main investments are hardware, facilities, and power contracts. And if the network becomes unprofitable or politically toxic, miners can redeploy that same hardware elsewhere on the network or on different networks. The same cannot be said for proof-of-stake systems. Proof-of-stake are protocol-locked systems. The capital is locked into those systems. So if someone freezes your accounts, that may be the end of your productive wealth. All of that capital is easy to lock up. There are no machines to confiscate. There's simply a flag to set on your network. And that makes them very vulnerable to censorship and coercion. To see a real-world example of that, just look at the resiliency of Bitcoin's hash power in the face of China's 2021 crackdown compared to the implosion of Tornado Cash on Ethereum after it was blacklisted. So the second useful thing to remember about proof of work is that a proof of work network has a relentless focus on solving a well-specified hard problem in a way which marshals global R&D resources. In the case of Bitcoin, it started out as something that you mined with CPUs, then economic competition, forced innovation involving mining with GPUs, and finally with ASICs, with order of magnitude improvements in efficiency every step of the way. Of course, Bitcoin also has severe disadvantages. First, the problem being solved is a toy math problem rather than anything useful to the world, and therefore the work can be considered useless and energetically wasteful on a grand scale. And second, because all the miners are focused on solving the same toy problem all at the same time, the problem must be extraordinarily hard. And to the degree that it is so hard, it bottlenecks the speed of the network, because necessarily not so many of these problems can be solved briefly in time. So if I were to summarize, Bitcoin is perhaps the most resilient and useful trustless economic coordination and hardware innovation driving mechanism of all time that is hobbled by the very properties that make it great. So our network, Ambient, asks the question, what if we could unhobble Bitcoin by borrowing from modern proof-of-stake designs while maintaining censorship resistance by tying network influence to solving of useful problems as a proxy for hardware investment? Our goal would be to make what we call non-blocking useful proof of work system, meaning a system wherein every network participant could work on a different specific useful problem in the same problem category at the same time, while accruing transaction ordering authority according to their relative contribution. Before I dive into this architecture, and remember our objective is to have a hard currency that can also be used as a currency at useful speeds. Let me define useful, because I think this is critically important. Our definition of useful is work that is already demanded at high scale in the world today, which we can legibly supply-demand match on a blockchain. For usefulness of work, people often stop at measurement. Of course, there are many things I can measure that are also used in the world. I could make a blockchain built around measuring the revolutions of bicycle wheels and claim that I was incentivizing green transportation. At which point, some clever miners might build machines that just rotated a small number of bicycle wheels at the highest possible speed to strip mine the network. To claim such a category of network as useful, our belief is that you need to quantify something like bicycle rentals that were being used in place of car rentals to drive a certain number of miles. Wheel rotations could be part of the quantification of miles traveled, but something is useful only to the extent that it is a substitute good for an existing economic activity, and you need to be able to measure the full substitution rather than just a part. That's why for us, tracking the orchestration of work, the supply and demand matching, is just as important as tracking the work itself. Our target for useful work is large language model inference, fine-tuning, and pre-training. And these are very useful things in the world for which demand is growing exponentially, the supply of which we can orchestrate to meet Web 3 and Web 2 consumer demand in well-understood formats at this point. We start with inference because we believe that it is the most promising target for a decentralized but specific global R&D campaign. In other words, we'd like to use our network's economic design to drive the cost of inference down as much as possible and make inference itself as decentralized and censorship resistant as possible to turn inference into a global shared utility rather than something that is gatekept by a small number of companies and vendors. Now, at this point, hearing the latter phrase, you may be saying to yourself, this is a crypto AI story as old as time, to which I would reply that the innovative economic design of ambient is the difference maker that involves the useful proof of work. You could think of crypto AI as the design space as a tree, to pose some contrast. On one branch, you have something like proof of work focused on the delivery of a very small number of models, and on the opposite branch, you have something like proof of stake used to deliver a model marketplace. And unfortunately, almost every crypto AI protocol is focused on proof of stake model marketplace, and this is the single worst economic design for GPU miners, for the people who provide your quality of service on your network. So that's rough. Early GPU miners need chunky rewards to be interested in your network because they have high CapEx, high OpEx. They are just going to peel off and leave if you have sparse transactional volume, which every crypto AI network does at the beginning, no matter what. And then when consumers come on and they try and put some demand on the system, they don't have a good experience because there's nobody mining. So that's a hurdle that almost all crypto AI protocols die on right away. It's just a really tough economic design to get over. But then, where we get, we kind of have stabbed ourselves in the heart as an industry is in our fascination with model marketplaces. So I'm a cathedral and a bazaar guy. I love a good bazaar as much as the next person, but you can't start with a bazaar. You actually have to do something well. And in the case of a model marketplace, in order to do something well, you need to focus your GPU firepower. And the reality is that a model marketplace that has 400 or 500 models is a miner's worst nightmare. There's a reason that OpenAI doesn't deliver 4,000 models on their network. It's because in order to deliver batch inference and fleet-based mixture of expert model routing, you need to have a finite number of models, like a really finite number of models, and that's how you get your efficiencies. But crypto AI takes the opposite path. You know, say 400 models on a network, and then your poor miner, you know, they get a request for model number 250. They have to download a 600 gigabyte model to serve somebody's 100 tokens. That might take 10 minutes. Then they have to load the model up. That might be another 10 minutes. And by the time you actually serve the tokens, you are deeply in the red, economically speaking. And by the time anyone validates that, all of the validators are also in the red. So that is just a plainly broken economic design, and yet it's been what we've been doing again and again since I've been watching it since 2017. So, you know, ambient exists on the opposite branch of this tree, where a useful proof of work network that focuses on delivering a very limited number of models, starting with one model, which we call ambient, which is currently based on GLM 4.6. Our design goal is to deliver this model in a decentralized way based on useful non-blocking proof of work. And so I'm going to describe how that's accomplished in rough terms. I'm happy to answer questions, or you can go read our light paper on ambient.xyz. But the idea is we want to relax some of the classic constraints that exist with proof of work. So for the purpose of this discussion, let's treat miners and validators, as we think of them in proof of stake systems, as sort of the same entity. Every validator on ambient is also a miner. The more important a miner you are, the more votes you would have as a validator. And what are we mining? Well, in this case, we're mining inference. So miners are looking at, let's say, 10 million token blocks of inference work. They're in a reverse auction for those blocks, where you say, oh, I'm willing to do this for 10 ambient, and someone says, oh, I'm willing to do this for 6 ambient, and the person who does it for 4 ambient might win the auction. So they get these blocks. They work the blocks. That work is validated, and then the inference goes back to all the different people whose requests comprised blocks. So that is a process that is accumulating credit to the important miners, the ones who are doing the actual work on the system. And importantly, that process of accumulating credit is separate from the process of ordering transactions. Instead, we take a model where leaders on the network are determined by those who, over 2 periods of time, a short period of time and a longer period of time, have accumulated the most credit. So we're picking those leaders based on their network problem-solving contribution. And validators have weights to their votes that accord with their network problem-solving contribution over these 2 time intervals as well. So I'm now going to briefly talk about how the work itself is measured, and then wrap this up and relate it to the geopolitics very briefly. The core of our proof of work system is based on something called the proof of logics. And so the idea is that this produces what's called a verified inference. A verified inference is a proof that a particular inference request was run with a correct prompt in a mathematically correct manner to produce a particular output at a particular time. It's something that we believe is really necessary for Web3 applications because it secures you against infrastructure providers cutting costs. I'm sure all of you have experienced Claude Code getting suddenly stupid. This happens. It's because they're quantizing their model to save some money. You don't want that happening to your agent that's negotiating economic deals on your behalf.
Yes, sir. 2 minutes.
Okay, I've got about 1 minute. We've got it also prevents supply chain attacks. where people might try to compromise the quality of models or compromise the nature of the models so that they could rug in different ways. So to briefly describe the technique, you have to think of large language models as commoditized things that are also unique snowflakes. So they really have fingerprints of thinking, and these fingerprints can be expressed in terms of the basket of words they think about as they infer word alternatives one at a time. And so that basket of words, the word chosen, the words not chosen, and the probabilities unnormalized associated with these, which are called logits, are kind of what comprise a model's characteristic way of thinking. And so, and we think this generalizes actually to a lot of different things, but what ambient does is it creates a mathematical web around this characteristic state of thinking, involving partial state reconstruction and bridging among states using something we call deltas in order to arrive at a net that constrains what the miner can do usefully in a given period of time. So in other words, it becomes much harder for them to forge something than to just do the work correctly. And it becomes very easy to detect tampering with the inference results itself. So I'll spare you, quite a lengthy technical description of that. It has very low overhead. Our goal is to offer verified inference for the same cost as unverified inference. And I'll wrap this up by discussing, the macro once more, because I think it's important. We've seen that if work is measured in money, and money can be corrupted, that there are infinite perverse incentives to corrupt money. So our challenge as an industry is to use crypto primitives to build incorruptible money that actually does real work in the economy. For ambient, AI is money. For all of you, money may be some other form of work. But our strong belief is that as the current system crumbles, we have a generational opportunity to replace it with something that will serve us well for the next 10,000 years. Thanks.
So if you want to start with a question, the next is Jason. So when I started to think about this problem, very fast I came to realize that gold is one of the main forms of money. And then the next thought is who is doing the alchemy, who is doing synthetic gold. So I find a company, Northern Fusion, that is doing exactly that, and they was thinking about how they are making synthetic gold. So. Do we have a ticker, no? Every time you want to pass a slide, let me.
Yeah, okay. I might get closer to you because there are quite a few transition slides. So
okay, that's fine.
Is it okay if I sit here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Hi everyone. My name is Jason Parisi. I'm from Marathon Fusion. We're based down in Potrero Hill. Also, big thanks to Yoni for inviting me here. I might be a slightly different flavor of talk to most of the crypto talks here. So I'm going to talk to you basically about some new ideas on alchemy and why it's going to scale energy and manufacturing in unexpected ways. I'll just give you like a warning. I think initially when we first discovered this idea, we thought it was a joke and it wasn't real. It always sounds ridiculous if someone says alchemy is a real thing, but hopefully I'll persuade you otherwise. Okay. Got it. Okay. So yeah, first I'll just start with the punchline, then I'll explain the details a little bit more. Okay. So scalable alchemy is solved by the neutrons that come out of nuclear fusion reactions. What does this mean? There is an isotope here. This is mercury, and mercury has several stable isotopes, which means they have different numbers of neutrons and protons. Okay. What you can do is you can hit this mercury isotope with a neutron in the edge of your fusion power block. It will lose one neutron, which is really good because you now get two neutrons out, which you need for the fuel cycle. And in 64 hours on average, it will decay into stable gold. So Au197, that's the only isotope of gold that is stable. Just to give you some numbers, a like vanilla power plant, maybe like a gigawatt thermal or 0.4 gigawatts electric, can co-produce electricity as fusion power plants before. But now it also produces around 2 tons of stable gold per year, and without compromising any other systems, with minimal changes to the overall design. And just to give you a flavor, like the amount of gold that has ever been made, like through true alchemy, like in the way that we're talking about, is like 10 to the minus 17 tons at CERN. So we basically beat that by 17 orders of magnitude in a single fusion power plant. So at the current prices, let's say, for example, someone goes out to build a fusion power plant, they say it's going to work. Like, I'm going to make money on this, okay? Or just about break even. The gold revenue that you get in addition to your electricity revenue triples your revenue from your fusion power plant at current gold prices. And so the way you could see it is you could actually fund fusion just from like gold production alone, and you could see electricity as a bonus. So this really like turns like the way we think about energy on its head. So yeah, fusion energy is electricity plus transmutation. I say transmutation because here I'm talking about gold transmutation, but there's actually all kinds of new materials that you can make at scale with fusion neutrons that are not currently accessible. And this is something that we're very excited about. So what are we going to do? At least with the alchemy revenue, we think that we can use this to fund terawatt scale fusion energy deployment, and also deliver a new industrial capability, which is manufacturing isotopes and elements basically in a way that was not possible before. So people talk a lot about inflation tonight, right? But one way you can fight that is try to introduce a technology that's highly deflationary. And I think that if we drive down the cost of energy and make available new building blocks for whatever we want to do, that's a really big idea. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about fusion, because maybe all this stuff was like you needed too much context. So let me tell you a bit more about the current like status quo, or what I'm calling pre-alchemy. So what is like the most vanilla way of thinking about nuclear fusion energy? Well, basically you have like a deuterium and tritium fuel, and those are just 2 isotopes of hydrogen. Somehow you make them fuse together, you get helium and a high energy neutron, and this is a machine called a tokamak, and here there's a plasma region where you have these fusion reactions going on. Something that's needed to close the fuel cycle, which is tritium is not naturally abundant, has a half-life of 12 years, so you can't find it. And so you need to breed it, basically. And you breed it by using that neutron to hit lithium in your blanket in the edge of your fusion reactor, okay? And typically that makes helium and it makes tritium, which you then feed back to do the fusion reactions all over again, and you get energy out of this process. So it's a really like insanely smart idea, and it's pretty cool, and it's very hard, and it's going to be very expensive to begin with. So this is called the fuel cycle, okay? There is an extra twist on this, which is really important, which is when you're using those neutrons from your fusion reactions to create tritium in your blanket, there are going to be some losses in the system because you have to extract the tritium from your blanket and process it. So you need slightly more neutrons in your blanket than you actually have in your fusion reactor itself. And that's called multiplication, or an end-to-end reaction here. So I'm just showing you on beryllium. Often you can have use beryllium for a neutron multiplier. Blah, 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 blah. Like this is what people have been thinking about for a long time, okay? Cool, so here's really like the core of the idea. When you do this neutron multiplying reaction in your fusion blanket, you make helium, and helium's it's not that valuable really. It's like, okay, I've made it, but it's not that interesting. And so the idea is, with this same type of end-to-end reaction, can you make something that's really, really valuable? And can you also do it with minimal design, like changes to the overall like engineering design that people are talking about? And the answer is like a resounding yes. So with alchemy, basically the ingredient is your neutron multiplier is now mercury 198, which is pretty cool. This plot, maybe Yoni, you can share the slides after so anyone can look at this for a bit more detail, but I won't go into too much detail now. So, but you use your fast neutrons for this multiplying reaction. Slow neutrons, you hit something called lithium-6, and you get your tritium from that. Okay, so the whole idea is we're basically doing the same as every other like fusion power plant design ever, but now our multiplication comes from mercury, which makes gold. Okay. It's pretty cool. Let's talk a little bit more about alchemy economics. So pre-alchemy, like what is the whole fusion idea about? Well, it's you have these fusion reactions, the neutrons come out and you thermalize them in a blanket, okay? So you just heat up some water. And it's a pretty cool idea, but like you're basically just heating water, generating electricity. Like a kind of standard fusion power plant might generate $150, $160 million a year in electricity revenue in the US. Okay. Now let's think about what an alchemy power plant looks like. So you're also generating electricity, such as you're also generating electricity and isotopes, such as gold, but it could be others. So now in your blanket, not only are you heating up a fluid, but you're extracting this like valuable thing that you're making, which is in this case gold. And so at current prices, you still get your electricity revenue, but now you're adding 2 tons of gold, which is like another $320 million a year. And so it's like fusion energy sounds so cool, right? I'm sure some of us here have heard about it. But just because something's cool doesn't mean it should exist. But now this is like economically irresistible. And so our idea is to try to basically put this massive like bounty in for fusion energy, and whoever can start to gobble up parts of the gold market will be handsomely rewarded. Okay, a few more numbers. The electricity market is like $1 trillion wholesale globally, and that's 3.5 terawatts of electricity. That's how much humanity uses roughly. Okay, the gold market is unusually large. It's about $600 billion a year, and if we could capture that, that would fund 2,500 fusion power plants. So almost 30% of our global electricity capacity can be subsidized by the gold market if we can capture it. That's like, I can't really think of any other industry that has a subsidy out there, which you could basically take advantage of by minimal design changes. So that's like the very big idea. So a little bit more about what else we can do with fusion neutrons. And so we think that fusion energy is not just a way to generate electricity and even gold, but we think it's a new platform for scalable economic transmutation of matter. Okay. So in addition to gold, we're planning to make medical radioisotopes for cancer therapy and diagnostics, other kinds of precious metals, not just gold, critical minerals, and other more exotic things that we can tell you about if you're interested, but these are a lot more speculative. This plot here is basically something called the table of the nuclides. So we have proton number versus neutron number, and each color basically tells you how much we can make in a fusion blanket. Okay, and you don't need to look at any like specific one. The point is we can make pretty much everything in extremely high quantities. There are some papers here that you can read if you're interested in more detail. Some meta questions for us to think about is what does it mean for like raw materials to have significantly different costs if really all we're doing is turning a feedstock into another material? So it kind of changes the way that we might think about scarcity. And then the next question is, what kind of new industries emerge with these new capabilities? One way we think about it is, if you think about like in the medieval era, if you had like a candle and you think about how much a photon costs, it's like really, really, really expensive. I can't remember the exact number, but it might be like 10 to the 6 or to 10 to the 10 times more expensive per photon than nowadays, right? We barely think about it. And if we can provide society with new materials that we can use for all kinds of things, we can't predict where that's going to go, but hopefully that's exciting and allows us to do some cool new things. So thanks a lot for your time.
Feel free to ask there some questions after. Okay, so in the same way that gold alchemy was not something that most people are thinking about, another idea that is very underrated is quantum money. Basically, what will happen after quantum computers, what kind of infrastructure we'll have to have, what is quantum money? So
Thank you, Yoni and Amir, for organizing this. And sorry in advance that's in my theme.
So yeah, my name is Lev. I'm part of Quicks, the quantum information computer science thing at University of Maryland. I work for Never Local, a startup doing post-quantum, and also quantum photography related things. And today we're going to be talking about quantum money. It's still very much sci-fi, so nothing super serious. But really, you have blockchain and cryptocurrency, where blockchain is a subset of cryptocurrency. So blockchain is Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on. And it's based off a distributed system. So you have servers, everything to communicate with. And it's very cool. There's a lot of things these days. But you can do more. So you can maybe have quantum-based money, which we're going into, money based off TEs, which somebody mentioned earlier. But in this talk, we're going to talk about quantum money, what it is, where it came from, and what it can do. So private key quantum money started out in the 60s, far before Bitcoin. And it's a very simple idea. It's more or less a ticket stub, where a private issuer, a government, a bank, can give a quantum state to an individual, and this individual can give it back to the government, and they can verify that the government did the issuing. And it takes advantage of this thing called uncertainty principle, or no cloning, however you want to think about it. I'm not going to get into it. It's experimentally doable. Has some cool side effects with quantum key distribution, but not the point of this talk. So what we're going to talk about is publicly verifiable quantum money. And really the point that I would want to impart to you guys is that you can think about with quantum, you can think about information as a physical resource. You cannot copy it, you cannot clone it, you can put it on, like, for example, a USB stick, and you can't make multiple copies, just one thing. And so just like gold, just like money, you don't want to be able to clone it, copy it, and that's where the money aspect of it comes in. So just a brief review of Schrödinger's this cat and quantum. Quantum mechanics is very strange. We don't really fully understand it even today. It's 100 years old. But really the key idea is you have a photon, and it's going to be, so they say, in two positions, off and on, 0 and 1. But only until you actually measure the photon will it collapse to 0 or 1, and it will become classical. So the classic thought experiment is if you have a cat, and the cat's fate, if it's going to be dead or alive, is hooked up to a photon. You don't know if it's going to be dead or alive until you actually open the box. And when you open the box, you'll find out if it's dead or alive. So what happens if you combine it with cryptography? Cryptography is what makes blockchain run. It's the same as hash functions, authentication, making circuits hidden. You can actually do some really cool things. And one of the things that you can do is quantum money. And what quantum money is I can give you a state. You can verify that some issuer to the bank or government, get that too, made that state. They don't actually have to go back to a server. And we're going to get into the means shortly as well. But just to reiterate, it's not tomorrow. This is like many years away, but it's pretty cool. So if you guys have seen like Google's press releases, they have these massive quantum computers. And sometime in the future, you hope you could like compress this down to a smaller, more reliable thing that actually works. But what quantum money would be is that you can put states and information onto one of these quantum computers, and you can carry them around. And then I can deposit, or I can give that quantum state to someone else, and they can check the validity of the money. Kind of how if you hold up a piece of cash to the light, you can look at the watermarks in dollars, except this is cryptographically verifiable, much harder, or more or less supposedly impossible, to make counterfeit quantum money. And what's pretty cool is there's no distributed system. So you can imagine a world far, far away where we're traveling light speed, or like many light years. You won't have to go back and ask 30 light years away, send from one planet to another, is this money actually due? Is it valid? You can just take your quantum money with you and show this new planet, I have real money, it's valid, it was issued by my home planet, no problem. And quantum cryptography really can do a lot of other things, which is quite cool. So you can do quantum money without a centralized issuer, just like Bitcoin. You can do proof of work combined with quantum money, where you have to solve some cryptographic puzzle, and that will allow you to issue quantum money as a little token. And same thing, you take it around, carry it with you, people can check it. You can do things like embedding smart contracts into quantum money. Exactly how it gets more tricky, but yeah, things. Some other near-termish things that more or less what I work on and what quantum can do. You can do one-time programs where you're able to transmit a program over to the quantum internet that allows people to evaluate it once. So it can send you some function, a bank can send some other bank your trading strategy, and then the second bank can only use that once, and then it self-destructs. And there's this thing called position verification. It's quite cool. where two verifiers can check where a prover is in the world physically. I guess in the world it's 3, but also not going to use that too much. And there's other far off things that quantum cryptography will do. So it can be certifiable deletion. You can prove that you deleted the program. Copy protection, though we would love that, meaning that you can't copy your program, you can't pirate it. And many more things that are related to this idea that you can put physical information onto a device, and you can't copy it, you can clone it. And yep, that's all I have for this talk.
Thank you, Lev. So the last talk, another Zan, are you here? Zan, come. So Zan from Wombo, building another approach for AI mining. And we can just thank the most.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everybody.
Do you have a?
No slide, I was asked to introduce myself.
You can start.
Okay, thanks, Tony, for organizing those no place. I'd rather be on a Sunday evening, and a half filled room with people who actually give a shit about this weird niche topic. And I feel I've been set up really well by Tyler and by Travis and by the other speakers. So the theme of my talk is about machine money, and machine money in the context of superintelligence. And yeah. So superintelligence is coming as a matter of technological inevitability. It's imminent, and its arrival marks the most profound transition point in history, concentrating unprecedented godlike power. And if you don't believe that, this talk probably isn't for you. You can just control this moment for the next 15 minutes. And the current trajectory, dominated by closed labs and centralized infrastructure, inherently consolidates this power with unaccountable corporate and state entities. This guarantees opacity, fragility, misalignment, and potential catastrophic risks for human interests and national survival. I'm going to read something. A guy in a cabin wrote this in the 1990s. If the machines are permitted to make all their own decisions, we can't make any conjectures as to the results, because it is impossible to guess how such machines might behave. We only point out that the fate of the human race would be at the mercy of the machines. On the other hand, it is possible that human control over the machines will be retained. In that case, the average man may have control over certain private machines of his own, but control over large systems of machines will be in the hands of a tiny elite. Due to improved techniques, the elites will have greater control over the masses, and because human work will no longer be necessary, the masses will be superfluous, a useless burden on the system. If the elite is ruthless, they may simply decide to exterminate the mass of humanity. If they're humane, they may use propaganda or other techniques to reduce the birth rate until the mass of humanity becomes extinct. Or if the elite consists of soft-hearted liberals, they may decide to play the role of good shepherds to the rest of the human race. They will see to it that everyone's physical needs are satisfied, that all children are raised under psychologically hygienic conditions, that everyone has a wholesome hobby to keep them busy, and these engineered humans may be happy in such a society. They will most certainly not be free. They will have been reduced to the status of domestic animals. That guy was a terrorist, by the way. I'm not saying it was about everything, but look around. What scenario are we heading toward? And so the dichotomy, especially like over the last week or two, is West versus East. American AI versus Chinese AI. That's the Davos frame. That's the AI 2027 frame. That's the situational awareness frame. There's another frame, of course, we're trying to talk about, and that's decentralized AI versus centralized AI. Any closed system is dangerous at the scale, so what's the alternative? So we've got this concept of a global AI supercomputer, not owned by anyone, distributed across the hardware humanity already has. Billions of devices, your MacBook, your gaming computer, your phone, your Tesla, your smart fridge, anything with a GPU becomes a node of this planetary network. And the mission is to ensure that superintelligence emerges not as a captured asset, but as a transparent, co-created public utility architected for and ultimately owned by this global community of contributors. So as you might imagine, there's a vast amount of compute out there sitting in our MacBooks, our gaming computers, our PlayStations that's not currently being activated. And we can do some very, very rough math, and this is very, very rough math, and say that there's approximately an equivalent amount of compute in total in all of this consumer hardware today, as there is in all of the mega core AI data centers. And of course, they're nowhere near as connected, but I just treat that as an assumption. The trouble is, every year the amount of compute that's going into the data centers, into the megacorps, into the government-owned data centers, is vastly outpacing the compute that's going to the rest of the world and the rest of the people. And so there's a strategic imperative that decentralized AI must confront. As the years keep going and our share goes from 50% to 10% to 1% to completely meaningless, we need to contend with the reality of the compute supply situation. And I think we need to go under them. There needs to be either a very strong technological incentive or economic incentive for the megacorps that contribute their compute to this global supercomputer, or it needs to be a political incentive. Like you rally together with your friends and say, we have a compute pool for, protecting New York State monkeys, and OpenAI and Gronk, you guys have to give us compute, or you're bad people. So, machine currency. I think Tyler introduced it rather well. These machines are going to want to transact with one another. And I think it's just as inevitable as superintelligence. AI models will pay for compute, data services. I don't think they'll use fiat. It's too slow and too surveilled and too dependent on centralized rails. I think machines need a native currency. And this is coming one way or another, whether we're designing it or not. But if we do have the option to design, we should ask ourselves, what kind of currency would a machine prefer? What properties would make such a currency optimal for autonomous agents? And if this thing is inevitable, we have a brief window to influence what it looks like. Can we embed humanity's interests into the very architecture of how machines transact? Some considerations and ideas I have about this. One, this machine currency should activate latent compute. So if you have compute somewhere and it's sitting there and it's doing nothing, it should be able to be activated with this currency. Two, we should have compute mobility and liquidity. So the ability to exchange time on hardware from one class of hardware to another. Three, it should be a store of value in a way that tracks technological progress and hardware acceleration. Four, it must create incentives strong enough to bring the mega corporations and the government-backed AI into the equation. And five, it must be something that machines would rationally choose. Okay, that's why I set up. Next, I'll give a bit of background on myself and the work that we're doing in the space. As I'm the founder of a company called Wombo. Wombo started off as mobile apps, viral AI apps. We launched a handful of apps since 2021. We launched basically the first mainstream image generator before Midjourney, before Stable Diffusion, before DALL-E. And our products have received over 200 million downloads. The number one issue was always inference costs, always our AWS bill. And so we were always motivated to find ways to reduce that cost. And we did that in a number of ways. But one particular idea was, say we're doing image generation for a user. Instead of doing that in the cloud with AWS, can we do that on your iPhone? And increasingly the answer is yes, because they've got better and better hardware. And so we started to offload some of our inference onto the user devices. Drop our costs, great. And the next natural question was, well, if I as a user can run my own inference, I can also run that same model and run inference for other users. And so that was the seed of what became W.ai, which kind of started as a side project to save money, and now is basically the entire motivation of the company and the reason we do anything. W.ai is our attempt to get closer to this global AI supercomputer acting as a substrate for decentralized superintelligence. It's live in a nascent state today, so you can go to W.ai and download something on your MacBook. Your MacBook will begin to receive work from the network and complete that work. If you're more compute rich, you don't have to download anything on your MacBook. You can just talk directly to the compute that you own. And we've had tens of thousands of people contribute compute. At any given moment, there's around 2,000 GPUs. We have more supply than demand right now. And so if you have some interesting research or ideas about what you'd like to do with this compute, we're happy to chat. And at the same time, because of our experience with these viral mobile apps, we feel very confident about our ability as the network matures to bring tons of users onto the network. Okay, some ideas about currency and machine currency. And this is all very early thinking. I'm not an economist, I'm not a crypto guy, I'm an app guy. But nevertheless, I'll wade into dangerous territory. So, core idea that we have is GPU time normalized to cost. A unit of value based on GPU time, normalized to the cost of the hardware, and we think this is a way to make compute fungible across different classes of machines. So say you have a $1,000 GPU, you run it for 10 hours. You should be able to redeem 10 hours worth of work on a $1,000 GPU indefinitely into the future. And so even 3 years from now, when that $1,000 GPU is capable of doing it much more, because you've stored that work beforehand, you would still be able to redeem it. Similarly, you do 10 hours of work on your $1,000 GPU. You should be able to exchange that for 1 hour of work on a $10,000 GPU. And so we've got this sort of ability to move up and down the hardware ladder. That doesn't exist today. So if that sounds like an interesting idea to you, we're very interested in chatting some more. Okay, so some things that need to happen for decentralized AI to not just be like a war proving or intellectual masturbation, but to actually shift civilization in some meaningful way. One, scale of participation. We need millions of compute contributors. For that, this probably needs to be, economically attractive. It needs to have an ideological movement behind it. It needs to be easy, interesting, and fun. And probably you need to tap into the underlying resentment and fear that many people have around AI and centralized AI. I'll briefly mention our head of propaganda, Dick Gay, is in the room with us. Dick Gay, can you stand up for a moment? Yeah, so people know who you are. Yeah, so if you're interested in our propaganda strategies, that's the guy to talk to. Okay, compute pools. Everyone should be able to spin up their own compute pool, say this is what the pool will be for, dedicate your compute to me. You're almost like an Instagram influencer or like a Kickstarter campaign, except instead of gathering money, you're gathering compute for people and deciding what it gets directed to. And finally, there needs to be a working value exchange, something that lets contributors earn, users pay, and value flow through the network in a way that's fair and efficient. And in a way that doesn't leave the lower tier compute completely uncompetitive and completely useless in the face of the H100s and B100s. So to close this out, I want to be clear, all still extremely uncertain. We don't know if decentralized AI will matter in 5 years or if it will be a footnote. The odds are long, the technical challenges are real, coordination problems are hard. But at the same time, centralized AI and decentralized AI aren't really opposites. They're two paths to the same destination. Superintelligence is coming in both. That's a technological inevitability. And so the question isn't whether, it's how, and who's at the table when it arises. If the only path forward is centralized, then power concentrates by default. A few companies, a few governments, they get to make the decisions for everyone. I mean, maybe that works out too, maybe it doesn't. But there's no counterbalance, no alternative, no check. And I don't know, I think we just end up with two men and one, like you already said, needing to completely depend on the government. And yeah, if this resonates with you, check out WII or get judgment. Much love, take care, everybody.
Thank you, Zion. Okay, so we are done, and we are planning to do it every month with a little bit of a different flavor for different types of money. So if you want updates, you can scan it, and then feel free to ask any of the speakers any questions. So thank you for coming.
Very wide. Oh, yeah, I was sitting in the corner area.
So the idea is like we don't That's pretty good.
Now it's like reasonable, it's like the most favorable. And also, what's on your mind?
I think they're really
I think building matters because work to me is focuses certain
Oh, thanks, Steve.
I've been sitting in here.
Hi, I'm here.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
What's up?
Good to see you.
Oh, we met here? With Santa Claus? You remember who
With the guy, yeah. Maybe that was, I was thinking a little earlier. We were using my lecture, so we're
It was what was
correct, please.
No, it's fine. It was actually a screen, so I recorded it.
Yeah, it was a different I brought the table. Yeah. The second time. How was the event?
It was like 6 or 7 topics. Which one can be the friends and it's about yeah, but make it roll.
Oh, that's super lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it's called Mount Fusion. The music fusion.
Yeah, so.
How are they?
What do you think? How
you been once
Oh, wait, let me catch up. I need to see you. I literally, when I got off the ship, one of my childhood friends was about to leave for a 4-month course. When he started this, she's the officer. He thinks he's a childhood friend of mine. He's actually rides there. So he goes out. He wanted to show us before. I thought that would be like a 30-minute thing.